Now let's go. As soon as they hear the voice and the flow, they already know it's.
In the studio, joining us for a discussion about her role in politics and helping us celebrate Women's History Month is Connecticut State Senator Marilyn Moore. Senator Moore. Is that the proper term, Senator, or do I need to call you something else?
Senator Moore
Senator Moore
is fine.
how are you this morning?
I'm wonderful. I'm happy to be here this morning also.
We're glad to have you. Glad to have you. You have had a pretty amazing career in activism and in politics. I was reading your bio, and I'm amazed at some of the things you did. But the first thing I wanted to ask you is, activism in politics is hard. What pushed you in that direction in your life?
Well, you know, when I was 13 years old, my father died, and I didn't have a lot of male figures around me, but I did have Mr. Charles Tisdale. He was my 7th and 8th grade teacher. He was tough. But he helped me frame who I am. Later in life, he ran for mayor for the city of Bridgeport in 79 and 83. He called me in. I knew nothing about nothing, but I believed in him, and I started working on his campaign. And one thing he did for me, that he saw something in me that I didn't see. He sent me to New York with a bus full of Hispanics that didn't speak English to work for someone who was running for Congress. Excuse me. That moment, I recognized that he wanted me to be active, and not in a place that it was easy, but to get the job done. And from there, it just kept moving forward.
That's amazing. So you ran, let's see if I can get my timeline correct. So you were first elected in 2014, is that correct?
Correct.
And what would you say, as you look at our state and the cities in our state, including Bridgeport, what would you say our greatest challenges are, and how have you seen us deal with them over the last 9 years that you've been in office?
They call Connecticut the state of steady habits. Many places we're the first, but many places we're the last. There's many towns, urban centers where there's high populations of minorities, but there's many more towns where there's no people of color. So I think the challenges has been for our state is to come together and see us as more of a mosaic of people, all having the same needs. People think about poverty, they think about black, brown people, but there are more white people that are facing poverty, who live in poverty every day. And so the challenge is, how do you build a real comprehensive plan that carries from one governor to another? That every time there's a new governor, we don't start over again, but there's a bigger plan for the state of Connecticut. That's the challenge, and that's always going to be the challenge about who is running the state and where their heart is and what is their plan for the state.
Now, you have a personal connection, it seems, to a lot of the things that you advocate for. You advocate on behalf of breast cancer. You're active in the war against hunger, social justice, gun violence, racial equality. You've been actively involved in all of these things. Talk to us about those items, particularly the ones involving women, since this is Women's History Month. Issues involving women that you have advocated for, feel strong about, and what you're doing.
So, I first want to say I carry my father's DNA. I really do believe this all is because of him, but I also believe that I have this energy from the ancestors, and that's how I keep going, right? So I worked at the telephone company, and it's really crazy how I got that job. I took the lowest paying job at the telephone company in 1979, and when I went to the office to apply for the job, they told me they were not hiring. And it was right here on Fairfield Avenue, the telephone company, and a manager told me that was not true. They were hiring, but the reason they didn't hire me or let me do an application is because I was black. Now, this was a white man telling me this, and I thought he was just stirring the pot. He told me to go back, and he said, tell them that that they're hiring, and the only reason they're not letting you fill out an application is because you're black. I don't think he was going to do it. He thought I was going to do it, but I did. I went back. I filled out an application. I scared the HR manager by what I said, and she let me fill out the application. I got hired. I sold Mickey Mouse phones up in Trumbull. In the 20-year span that I was there, I saw a lot of women in lower paying jobs, and always a male as the supervisor, as the manager. And so I would do everything I could over the course of 18 years to raise women up, to make sure their voices were heard. And not as the clerical people, not as the secretaries, not as the person running to get the coffee, but in leadership positions. Because I felt it was so hard for me, I imagined what it was for other people. And I think that mindset, unintentional, just stuck with me on everything else I did. When I left the telephone company, the joke was I was going to do paper or plastic, because I was so tired of managing people. When I left the telephone company, I had started their long distance company and their cellular company, right? I left in 95, and I went to UB, and I took this class on what do you want to be when you grow up. I learned how to do a resume, and I put it on my resume on pink paper and sent it to Planned Parenthood for a job. I didn't really want the job because I had planned on not doing anything for a while. I got this job doing outreach. And when I was at Planned Parenthood doing outreach for reproductive health, I realized the paperwork that I was taking out in the brochures were all about white people. There was nobody black in any of those pamphlets. And I said one day, I can't take these out. You're going to have to create something for me to take into the community. This is insulting. If I'm going to talk about breast cancer and disparities, I need to have something that reflects the community I'm going to. I got so deep into doing this and fighting two fights. One, the war against breast cancer. At that time, the myth was it was a white woman's disease and that black women did not get it. But the truth of the matter was black women were getting it, but they were dying at higher rates because they were not getting early detection treatment. Now, I don't have a history of breast cancer, but I do have a history of fighting for something that I believe there's nobody else is fighting for. And I got into that. I replicated a national program called the Witness Project. And for the next 18 years, I had a team at one point, probably about 20 people statewide, and we reached over 20,000 women throughout the state of Connecticut. We fought for mammograms. We fought for free screening services for women. We knocked down doors with doctors who I felt had their biases on how they made a decision on what they were going to do for black women versus white women. And I kept comparing that black women are not getting the same information. They're not getting the same services. And we busted down doors and made a huge difference of dispelling myths and getting access to services for women for mammograms.
That's outstanding. That's outstanding work. And the fact that you advocate for and are passionate about those things and actually put energy into it is refreshing to hear somebody say that.
Well, I find it, for me personally, it's hard for me to fight for myself when it's my own issue, but it's easier for me to fight for someone else.
Interesting.
Right? And that's what always happens. It's not about what I have or what I need. It's about being an advocate for someone else and saying things that nobody else will say to get people what they need.
Now, you've been in elected office since 2014. So what would you say over that time period is what we consider your greatest accomplishment, if you had to?
Well, I feel like I have like 4 or 5 things in my basket.
Tell us what they are.
So the first one was when I went to Hartford, I had already worked for Senator Gomes for 2 years as his legislative aide. So I kind of knew where the bathroom was, right? So I had a little bit of an edge. But I listened to what people were saying to Senator Gomes about what they wanted to get done. And he was such a maverick on labor that I knew that's not where I wanted to go, because we were up there at the same time. But because I had worked for and fought for women who had breast cancer, I knew that I wanted to do something in the way of human services. So I was assigned to chair the Committee on Human Services, overseeing Medicaid, Husky, services for the elderly. And a group of people came to me and said, we want to fight for a higher wage. And I'm like, all right, let's see what happens. So we have these public hearings, and all these people were coming into these public hearings, and they were talking about low wage, working 3 jobs, making $9 an hour, trying to support their family. But they were going from job to job to job to make up for what they should receive on one. So I heard so many stories, and I got to tell you, I had left the telephone company in '95. At that time, I was making over $70,000 in that job. So here I am in the year 2014, and people are talking about they're making under $50,000, $40,000 a year would be big money. So I took on the fight for 15. That was my first fight for anything, and it was hard. I stood on the floor of the Senate in my first year, and I was questioned by a Republican about why should we raise the rates to 15 and how businesses were going to leave Connecticut, and it was just going to Bridgeport and urban centers. People came up to Hartford in droves to testify for that bill and against what that person had said. And so I was like, are people really only making $10 an hour? So what I did is I applied for a job online at Target. Now, first I want to say how this really happened. My son, I kept saying, you need to go get a job at one of these places that they're hiring. He says, I try all the time. They're not hiring. So I went online and said, I'm going to go get a job in Target to find out what it's like. I put in that online application on Thursday. Saturday, they were interviewing me. So I go up to Target in Trumbull. The young lady interviews me. I was pushing to try to get like $10.50 an hour. She wouldn't budge. She kept saying to me, well, do you want the job? Do you want the job? And I couldn't move her beyond this $9 and something an hour. I took the job, and I worked in Target for about a month. They had me stocking shelves, ringing the front counter, putting stuff back, everything underneath the sun. I mean, they were running me back and forth. And so what I was trying to do is I was trying to get to 40 hours, but they would never give me that much. They would kept me under 10, 15, because this was in July, September. They really were prepping me for Christmas. So in the meantime, I couldn't get these hours, right? And I was like, this is crazy. So people from my district were coming in, because I represent all of Trumbull, and they were making fun of me. What are you doing here?
Like you working here?
You have it. Is it that bad, Marilyn? You're going to take a job in Target? And I would tell them, I'm fine.
That's genius. That's genius.
and you know what was really funny is my bestest friend in the whole wide world, her grandson got the job at the same time. And he kept on looking at me like, Auntie, why are you here? And I was like, I'm fine. But I wanted to find out really what it was like to work for $9 an hour, $10 an hour, how hard it is to try and get a raise. And I explained to them that I had been a manager, that I had all these things underneath me. Could I get a higher pay? The only thing I didn't tell them is that I was a senator. But once they found out I was the senator, then I got a lot of hours, and then I told them, sayonara, I'm gone. I'm out of here. Yeah. So, but I did move that $15 minimum wage, and it took like another 3 or 4 years to keep pushing the envelope. We didn't get that first year, but we got the conversation going, right? And then someone came in, and I joined, labor people came in and joined the fight, and we moved that. For me, that impacted everybody in Connecticut, and I think that was the greatest accomplishment that I've had since I've been there. And I did that in my first year.
Wow. Doc Hardy here with Senator Marilyn Moore. This is WPKN 89.5 FM. We're going to take a brief musical break. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. This is Doc Hardy, the Doc Hardy Show on WPKN 89.5 FM. My guest in studio is Connecticut State Senator Marilyn Moore. So tell us, what makes you different from any other politician? What makes you unique? What do you bring to the table that makes you unique and hence successful?
I think it's my life experiences. My life experiences of being here in Bridgeport. I grew up in the Hollow, less than a mile away from where we are right now. And I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood of Irish, Italian, Puerto Ricans were just starting to come when I was growing up. And it seemed the most natural thing to be with everybody. It didn't seem natural to just be around blacks or just to be around any one group of people. And I embraced that as what was normal, right? Do you know, I didn't know that there were black people on the east end of Bridgeport until I was 16 years old. When I was, back then you stayed in your own neighborhood, right? My neighborhood was diverse. But I think I carry that understanding of all people and just people as people. I see color, but it doesn't make me think of a person differently, right? It may make me a little bit more sensitive to their culture, but it doesn't make me feel different about who they are. And I think that is what I have carried into everything that I've done. I've never tried to treat someone bad because of the color of their skin or because they didn't speak English. I remember that there was a little boy in one of my classes who had come here from Portugal and didn't speak English, and Henry Kelly was his buddy and took him around. I thought that was normal, that when someone comes here who can't speak English, you help them, you don't make fun of them. That man is a judge, a Connecticut state judge, right? And so that's how I was brought up, and that's what I think is normal, and I think a lot of us are not taught that way, and so we don't carry it into the world.